Do you know how to plan a season? An entire training season from the day you start training to your goal race. I'm Jace Fitzgerald, the founder of strengthrunning.com, and that's what we're going to talk about in this video. I'm going to share what mistakes that you should avoid, how to plan your big picture training, and also how to schedule tune-up races so that you can have an entire training cycle perfectly planned so that you can focus on running fast during your goal race. Let's get started. All right, before I start geeking out on some really awesome graphs that I have planned for you, I want to talk about the mistakes that you have to avoid when planning your season, because these are super common, and if you fix just these couple mistakes, you're going to ultimately plan a much better training cycle than if you didn't. So mistake number one is planning a training cycle that's either way too short or way too long. Now, depending upon your goal race and your fitness level, your training cycle should be about 16 to 20 weeks. Now, this is 16 to 20 weeks of race-specific training. Now, what exactly does that mean? That ultimately means that from the day you start training for your goal race until your goal race, that chunk of time should be about 16 to 20 weeks. Now, if you're a new runner and you need extra time to build up in distance to your goal race, or if you're training for an ultra marathon, especially a long one of 50 to 100 miles, you may want a slightly longer training cycle of 22 to 24 weeks. But I wouldn't recommend going any longer than 24 weeks because I've found that runners tend to get burned out or injured when they follow a strict training schedule for such a long period of time. Now, the shorter your race is, the less time you likely need to get ready for it. So if you're training for a 5K, a 12, 14, or 16-week training cycle could work for you. Now, longer races might require a longer period of time to help you get ready for it. Okay, so try not to plan a training cycle too long or too short. Now, especially for new runners here who are getting ready for longer races. For example, if you're a new runner getting ready for your first half marathon, I would caution you against trying to get ready for that race in only 10 weeks. You have to build up your long run. You need to make sure that your mileage is at a level that's going to support your race. And if you only give yourself 10 weeks, 8 weeks, or maybe even 12 weeks, as a newer runner whose mileage is likely pretty low, that's probably not enough time. And so a longer training cycle is going to let you build up gradually, focus on injury prevention, and ultimately have a much better race. Mistake number two, no progression. Now here's where I'm going to draw an awesome graph for you. Now progression simply means that your training moves from point A to point B to point C, ultimately leading you to your goal. Now, progression can be illustrated by my insanely awesome artistic skills here. Now, if your fitness level is here, now this is time, and this is just effort or volume. What you want is essentially that kind of a progression throughout your training cycle. So what exactly does this mean? This means mileage and intensity, or in other words, the speed of your workouts, the overall effort of your faster workouts. Now this is a very simple graph here. Now we can get a little bit more specific, and instead of just a 45-degree angle of always increasing mileage and intensity, we can do this a little bit smarter. Still get to the same point and start from the same level, but we can get there in a little bit more systematic way. So this is the way I like to build in progression. So here's what we're doing. We're building up and then we're leveling off. It's a 2 steps forward, 1 step back approach. And then occasionally, right here and right here, we take a big step back. And this is what I would call a recovery week in your training. So you're going to build your mileage a little bit, but then you're going to stay at that mileage. Then you're going to take a break. Then you're going to do it all over again. And this cycle repeats itself. And so by allowing your body to be pushed and challenged with higher mileage or longer workouts or faster workouts, you're going to get in a lot better shape. But instead of just constantly increasing volume and intensity, you're doing it in a much smarter way. You're going up, but then you're staying there and letting your body adapt to it. You're going up, staying there for a little while, and then taking a week perhaps where your volume dips down, your intensity dips down, and this really allows your body to absorb that training, to recover, and also to give yourself a mental break, because you can't be on all the time for your training. You need to give yourself a break sometimes. So this is a general graph of progression, and most runners don't implement this in their training. So what they'll do is they'll do random workouts that they find in magazines, or their mileage will never increase, or they'll just stay at a certain mileage for the duration of their training program. And then they keep running the same times over and over and over again in their races. And so this is a really great way to get to a new level of fitness so that you can ultimately race faster. All right, here we have mistake number 3. Can you guess what it is? First and foremost, this is a really long season. This is 29 weeks with races spanning from the end of April all the way to the beginning of November. So the season itself is way too long. But the bigger mistake here is including races from the very beginning to the very end of your training cycle. And the problem with that is if you're constantly focused on races, you can never be too focused on your training. And when your training suffers, your racing is going to suffer. So here you can see that this runner is trying to schedule races roughly once every 6 weeks or so from late April all the way till their goal race, which is a 10K in early November. Now, when you race too often, when you race without any structure or strategy behind it, you're going to increase your injury risk, and you're going to increase the risk that you just get burned out and tired of racing. So we want to avoid that at all costs. So here's a couple things that you can do. First and foremost, any tune-up races that you schedule should be clustered in roughly at the second half of your training cycle, because those races are 100% efforts. You're trying to run as fast as you can, and because of that, they're going to help you get into your peak shape as soon as possible. So by doing these races early in the season, you're neglecting the base building period. The period where you should be focusing a little bit more on aerobic work, a little bit more on endurance, and instead you're focusing on 5K races at 100% effort. So it's going to get you in really good shape, but really quickly and at the wrong time. So that's what we want to avoid. Now, the other mistake here is the fact that there are a lot of tune-up races here, but none of them are particularly close to the goal race. Now, with shorter race distances, in this example of 5K to 10K, you can afford to run this many races in a season. This number of races actually isn't the problem. It's how far apart they're spaced. So what I would tell this runner is, let's put 2 5K races in October and maybe 1 or 2 in September. And this gives you a race season of roughly 8 weeks, depending upon how they're scheduled. And this is going to help that runner get into their peak shape and accomplish their goal time a lot more effectively than if they were running races way back in April at the beginning of their proposed schedule. Okay, the final element of planning your season is your training. Of course, that's what you're doing on a day-to-day basis, is preparing for your race. So now that we know how long your cycle should be, how to better plan tune-up races, and what specific mistakes to avoid, let's talk about some big picture training principles that every training plan should have, no matter what race distance you're training. So we understand that training needs progression. If you don't progress in your training, then your race times won't get progressively faster and faster. So depending upon what race distance you're training for, this is what your training should ultimately look like from a very high level look. So we have time over here, and let's say here is your goal race. Goal race, should have been an artist. And here we have effort. So this line here is mileage. And this line here is intensity. So you can see that there's definitely an inverse relationship here. The beginning part of your training cycle, even if you're training for a short race like a 5K, is going to be lower intensity with a bigger focus on mileage, or in other words, aerobic, endurance-focused workouts and training principles. Now, as you get closer to your goal race, that mileage is going to peak, and it's going to gradually come down, and then a lot of runners understand this period here as the taper. This is when your volume decreases, okay? Now intensity is going to increase, so you're running faster workouts. For our 5K runner example, they're going to be doing workouts that more closely mimic the demands of that specific race, okay? And so intensity peaks right before the goal race here as mileage is dropping. And this is a very high level look at how you would plan your training. Now this is essentially what periodization is. There are different periods in your training. So you focus on aerobic and low intensity first, and then you kind of switch that as you get closer to your goal race. Now this is very simplistic, and there's a lot of different ways that you can look at periodization, and I do plan on really nerding out on this stuff in a future video, so stay tuned for that. But until then, I want to give you an idea of how your training should go from month to month as you get closer to your goal race. One of the big lessons that I want you to learn from this video is that training is strategic. It has a purpose, and it's not random. To quote Coach Steve Magnus, he recently said, if the purpose of training is to get people randomly tired, well, that's not a very hard thing to do. Just ask CrossFit. So now that I've gotten my CrossFit zing out of the way, I want you to see that there's progression. There is a way of going about training that's going to get you to your peak shape. And so now that we've talked a little bit about training theory, and progression, I want to move into race scheduling so that you know exactly how to plan your tune-up races. All right, finally, let's talk about scheduling tune-up races. Now we talked before about what not to do. So now I want to talk about what you can do to better plan your tune-up races. And we're going to use two examples here. We're going to use a goal race of a half marathon and a goal race of a marathon. So let's start with the harder one first. Typically, the shorter the race, the more you can race before it. So if you're training for a 5K, you can run a lot of 5Ks or even shorter distances before you get to your goal 5K race. Same is true for a 10K, and it gets progressively a little bit less true as you go up in distance. So for example, the marathon, you probably only want to run one half marathon tune-up race before that. So let's start with the half marathon. Now if you're half marathon, and this is your goal race, is let's say it is October 31st. Very end of October. I don't even know if that's a weekend date, but we're rolling with it. What you want to do is schedule a tune-up race that's shorter than your goal race. Now for a half marathon, you can do this 2 to 4 weeks before this goal race. So what you can do is roughly the 15th, anywhere from the 1st to the 15th of October, you can schedule a 10K, even up to 10 miles. And this is a really beneficial way of preparing for a half marathon. Now you can also run an additional race. With the half marathon, you can probably do about 2 races beforehand. And so what I would recommend is focusing on a distance somewhere between 10K and 10 miles, and that can include a 15K race. You could go down to 8 kilometers, which is not as common race distance, but they are available. But that would be earlier in the season. So I would go 8K to 10K to goal half marathon, or I would go 10K to 10 miles, and then your goal half marathon. Now, this would be, say, 2 weeks before your goal half marathon, and this would be another 2 weeks before your 10K. So as you can see from this very elegant chicken scratch, you can schedule up to 2 races before the half, and I think that's an ideal scheduling for the half marathon. If you schedule too many, you run into the problems of peaking too early or getting burned out from too much racing. If you don't schedule any tune-up races before your goal race, then you run into the problem of just not being race ready. Racing is a skill that must be practiced frequently. Okay, so let's look at scheduling some tune-up races for a marathon. Now this is a little easier because like I said before, the number of tune-up races that you run before a longer race is going to be shorter. There are not going to be as many. So, for the marathon, typically what you want to do is you want to run a half marathon 4 to 6 weeks out from your marathon. I think this is the ideal time frame. You're going to be able to run a race distance that's specific to the marathon, but that will still allow you enough time to recover and focus on another 1 to 2 weeks of solid training before your goal marathon. Any other race distance that's significantly shorter than a half marathon, you run into the issue of it just not being very specific to the marathon. And if the marathon is your goal race, it doesn't make much sense to race a 5K 3 weeks out from your marathon. You're not building the exact type of fitness that you need to run a good marathon. Okay, we've covered why planning your season is so important, what mistakes to avoid, how to schedule tune-up races, and some really high-level pictures of what your training should look like from start to finish. I really hope this video has been helpful in helping you plan your season. And if you'd like any more hands-on support, feel free to shoot me an email, support@strengthrunning.com, and I'm happy to help. Until then, good luck with your training. Mistake. Ooh, huh. Ooh. As soon as I go through puberty, I'll start this.